Sew-in labels. These are a great way to add just a little something extra to your sewing projects. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jen. This channel is all about making sewing fun and approachable, and we are going to be talking all about these woven labels. We are going to be going over a few different types of sew-in labels, and I'm going to give you some ideas on how to use them and show you how. All right, I've got a few of these out. Some of these are from the Sarah Hartz brand, and I actually stock these in the Sewing Report Etsy shop. I will put a link in the description box. These are so cute. They are woven, premium woven labels. Many of them have this beautiful metallic thread. So I just love these, and I decided to order some for the shop. I also have a few that I got a few years ago from, I believe these are from Dutch Label Shop. And I've seen quite a few different sources where you can get custom labels made. So these say handmade by Sewing Report. And these are also sort of in a cream background and then a gold woven text. Just beautiful. And here's what the back looks like. There are different types. So these are made in 2024. So let's bust one of these guys out. The made in 2024 labels are a little bit different. They're folded in half. So you basically stitch these right at the top here. You can put these on a seam. You can also put this within a binding. So if you're doing a quilt project, you can do that. So that is one idea. I also have these really cute, these are smaller labels, and these are more square. They're also folded, but I just love the fruits. I thought those were super cute. These Sarah Hartz labels are $8 each for a package of 8, so the labels cost $1 each. But again, aren't these adorable? And you can really jazz up a project, give it a really nice finishing professional touch, and just a little something extra. These are also woven, so there's no like screen printing that's gonna come off or anything like that. And then I'm also gonna show you these labels say made for you. So this is another variety. These are a little bit different because they're not folded in half like the made in 2024 labels. These are actually folded at the sides, so you can stitch on each side. Let's get started with sewing some of these labels. First up, we have this made in 2024 label. It is sort of an off-white cream and gold. This is obviously woven, and it is folded, and you've got a little under a 1/4 inch section here of a seam allowance. I'm going to be installing this on the inside of a drawstring bag on a seam. I'm just going to be basting the label to the fabric just so it is straight and doesn't go on crooked. So I found the center point on the fabric piece and I marked it, and then I also marked the center point on the label itself. I'm really just lining up these 2 points here, the center points, and then I will baste this a little under a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay. Now the label will stay in place while I sew the seam together. This is actually the lining for my drawstring bag. We're going to be sewing these two fabrics together. I did glue baste this, the edge here, just right inside the seam allowance with some Elmer's washable school glue. This is something I do quite a bit here. And because I basted the label already, I don't have to worry about it getting out of place while I'm stitching the seam. I'm gonna stitch a little bit over a 1/4 inch. My stitch length is set at 3. Now we're gonna back stitch a little bit. Okay. And we will be stitching over the label again, really right over the previous stitch line. All right, go to the end here. All right, back stitch. Okay, the label is now sewn into the seam, but I want to keep it from flopping around. So I pressed the top fabric away from the label, so the seam allowance is all pointed away from the label, and I'm going to top stitch right here just to keep this in place a little bit more and keep this fabric from shifting around. And I'm gonna do about 1/8 of an inch. I'll be using this inner metal piece on the walking foot just sort of as a seam guide here. Set my stitch length to about 3.25. And here it is. I think it turned out pretty well. This is sewing a label in horizontally on an inside seam. So this would be good for certain types of clothing or small projects like the inside of a bag. You're not limited to installing these labels on the inside of your project. I'm actually going to be putting this fruit watermelon label on the outside of this drawstring bag. So I'm going to be doing boxed out corners, and I want the label to be on the outside side seam of this project. So I'm sort of eyeballing it. So I'm going to install the label. I'm putting the label in the seam here. I'm going to be basting this in place so it stays in, and then we'll be sewing this into the project. Okay, I might put this down a little bit. So my corners will probably be boxed out about this much. So I'm gonna put this about here. And I want to line this up with the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to baste it down just under 1/4 of an inch because my seam will be 1/4 of an inch. And then just sew this into place here. Okay, the label is now basted into place, and I'm only doing this so it doesn't get shifted around. We're back at the sewing machine where I am stitching together the main fabrics, and I've already basted the label to one side. So now we're going to be sewing over this and getting everything into place. And just to keep it secure, the section where the label is, I'm just going to back stitch just to make sure that it is really secure here. Then we're going to keep sewing this project together. I went ahead and switched out my presser foot from the walking foot to this very skinny foot. This is good for zippers or any time that you want to edge stitch, because you can just use the edge of the foot as a guide for your seam. And I'm gonna try to use these Sew Tights lights. I don't know if these will work, but we're gonna try to keep my label in place. So this method, it's just sewing all around the edge of the label. You can use this for, like, if you're doing an inside label, or you can do it on the outside if you wanna do that. And this is just my woven label. Again, nothing fancy, just a simple rectangular label. So figure out where you want to put your label. The reason I'm not sure if this will work is because the bed of this machine is metal. This is the Juki DDL 8700. Oh, and by the way, everything here is linked down below in the description box. I do sell Sew Tights in the Etsy shop as well. When I sew labels, I usually like to start on the bottom edge and then work my way all around, and then you'll just be stopping at all the corners to pivot. So we're gonna give this a whirl and see if this works. Okay. Put the back on here. And I'm not going to keep these Sew Tights on the entire time, just for the first few, like just until we get started. So just to sort of keep it in place initially. And you don't have to worry about back stitching because you'll be sewing like all the way around in a rectangle. And then when you get to the beginning again, you can just stitch over the other stitches and that should lock them in place. So yeah, this seems to be a good choice because the magnets aren't as strong as the regular strength. Okay, yeah, this seems to be working out okay. All right, and now I'm gonna take the Sew Tight off. Just now that I've got a few stitches in, the label's not really gonna go anywhere. So I think this method seemed to work out okay, but make sure to use the light version because it's not as strong. But it didn't really stick to the machine bed too much, so that's good. All right, and then try to get as close as you can to the edge of the label. Here we go. Without going off the edge here. Here we go. All right, so leave your needle down. I'm also gonna take this opportunity to trim my threads here. Just while I'm here, might as well take care of that so they're not in the way. So just trim the threads. So we're just gonna do the same thing and try to stick to the edge. And this should be pretty good. Okay. Okay. All right. On the top here. This is just a very simple method of doing this. All right, leave your needle down, and that's how you make sure you don't get those skipped corners there. All right, we're going to go down the side here. Okay. All right, and then now we're almost back where we started, and I'm just going to go over those existing stitches a few times. So I usually do it for at least like maybe a ½ inch or so, like at least a few, and that should keep your label in place here. If you want to make sure the threads don't come unraveled, all right, go to the back, and then you'll see a loop here, and that's the top thread, and you want to pull this through to the back here. So use a seam ripper and pull it to the back. So now both threads are on the back here. Tie a knot, knot it a few times, and that should keep it from popping out. I'm going to do like 3 or 4. All right, so now the threads are secure and they're not loose. And this is on the back, so it won't show. Just trim that off. And this is done. It's not totally perfect, but I did use thread that blends in. So if you're using a contrast thread, your stitching will show up more, but if you're using matching thread, it looks fine. Now we'll take the same label, and instead of sewing all around the edges, we're just going to sew the sides. So this is like if you want like a loop, more of like a loop, you know, kind of like on clothing or something. Now we're gonna use the Sew Tights Light again, and I still have the stitch length around 2.5, so that should be okay. In this situation, we're just gonna be sewing the edges here. All right, and I'm gonna take the Sew Tight off. This was just to keep it in place initially. And now I'm just gonna flip this in the other direction. I'm gonna trim the threads. If you're using an electronic home sewing machine, you may have something called a bar tack stitch, and that would also work for this label as well. All right, so we're just gonna go back over these stitches in the other direction, and I'm just gonna do this a few times. So do it like, 4 or 5 times, and just go over this area. Just enough so that these stitches don't go anywhere. All right, and keep the needle down and just keep going over those same stitches. All right, I think that should be okay. Just do the other side in the same manner. I'm not even trimming the threads here. I'm using the edge of the foot as an easy guide here to line up with the edge of the label. Just keep going back and forth here. And it won't take you too long. This is a real easy way to do things. Again, doesn't have to be perfect either, especially since the thread I'm using blends in. Do this a few times, and this should be pretty secure. All right, we'll do one more time. Okay. All right, and just trim these. This looks fairly neat on the back as well. So here's the front. Not totally perfect. I probably could have done this side a little bit neater, and you get a little loop if you want to like hang this from something, like if you're doing it on a towel, something like that. You can just stitch along the side edges. Now we're going to do this Made For You label, and this one is a little bit different. So it came folded in at the sides here. So here's the back, and then when you see the front, at first it kind of looks like the Made in 2024 label, but this one is folded at the bottom here, and this one is folded in at both sides. So this is going to be similar to the way I did this label, but this is just folded on the ends. So we're just gonna sew down the sides here, and I'm going to reinforce it a few times. So because this is square, I don't even think I really need a sew tight or anything. I'm just gonna try to like hold it in place. We'll just do it that way. Okay, so let's just do this guy here. And again, I'm using the edge of this foot as a guide. So we're just using this as a guide here, the Made For You label, and this is folded in, I would say it's folded in about 1/4 inch. So I just have to sew about 1/8 inch seam allowance, and I should be good here. All right, so let's get started. I've got a 2.5 stitch length here, and I'm just gonna keep doing the same thing, and I'm just gonna keep turning around and sewing in the other direction. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim these threads right now. Using this as a guide, I'm just gonna go over this same thread here. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be totally perfect. Go back. I'm probably gonna do this like 4 times, something like that. And just, okay. Okay. All right, we'll do like one more time here. We'll do one more pass. Okay. All right, now we'll go over to the other side here. Same thing, just sew up and down. Okay, we'll do one more stitch. All right. I'm just gonna trim these threads here. Trim them while I can. Yeah, you're really just going over your previous stitches. That's all you're doing here. Just go over the stitches again and again until you feel like it's pretty secure here. All right. I'm just going to do one more pass here. We'll call it a day. And again, it's not super neat. And you could also do the bar tack stitch on a computerized sewing machine if you want to do that. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. And here is the Made For You label where we've just stitched down the sides that were folded over. One more I'm going to show you, and that is how to sew your label into quilt binding or double fold binding. So I've got a sample fabric here with a nice clean edge, and here is another Made in 2024 label. This is the type that folds in half, and I have some binding here. So this is some double fold binding I just made up. Again, you can use quilt binding or you can use your regular like bias binding or, you know, store-bought binding, anything you want to do. So the first thing I am going to do, all right, I'm gonna increase my stitch length to about 3. I've got my skinny presser foot still here, and I'm just going to baste this to the edge of the fabric. Now this could be your quilting project, this could be a quilt, this could be anything. All right, so just make sure it is where you want it to be here. I'm using about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here. All right, make sure it's all lined up, and I'm just using my fingers to keep it in place here. So just baste this into place here and kind of go off the sides here. I also do sell these double curved scissors. They're great. They're in the Etsy shop as well. In fact, most of the supplies I'm using in this video are available at sewingreport.etsy.com. Because I did this, I don't have to worry about this getting all crooked or out of whack or anything like that. I'm going to apply the binding starting from the back, and then we're going to finish it off on the front. So I'm going to take my magic pins here. All right, so I'm going to line this up with the edge of the fabric. Pin this in place here. So use these pins maybe every few inches here. You can also glue based, you can use whatever you want. So I'm just gonna do this because it's the easiest right here. So we're just gonna do this. So just keep going down the line here. When it comes to the binding, you want to stitch just on the inside of this fold line here. So I'm just gonna use the edge of the foot to line this up, and then I'll remove the pins as I go. I'm just using a fairly long stitch length because it doesn't really matter too much for the inside, so just a 3.0. And I'm just gonna use this inside fold and line this up with the edge of the presser foot. That's why I'm glad I'm using the skinny one here. Okay, I'm just gonna remove the pins as I go. All right, like this. Make sure the two fabrics are lined up on the edge here. It'll give you nice results. Okay, so remove the pin here, keeping that lined up. You can also use something like a seam ripper or some other tool to kind of keep the fabric in place if you don't want to keep your fingers there. You can do that as well. I remove the pins. Like another finger here. And these stitches won't be visible from the outside, so you don't really have to worry too much. The thing that really matters is the edge stitching to close this up. All right, so This obviously doesn't look very neat, but that's okay. So here is the stitch line, and I started from the back because I want the stitches on the front to be neat. This folded over from the back here, and you'll just fold this around the edge of the fabric, and this will cover up the previous line of stitching on the front. So you can see here is the label and the edge. This will be hidden. You got a nice, neat finish here, neat binded edge. And I'm just gonna take some pins here and just pin this in place. Put a few pins here, fold this over. This is a bound edge. Look how nice the label looks in here, nice and neat, tucked in there. You can use pins, you can use clips, you can also glue based. I'm just using the pins just because this is the easiest for demonstration purposes. To close this up, you just have to edge stitch, and that's why this foot comes in handy. And this will cover both sides, so this will cover the front and the back here. Yeah, we'll do like a 3.25 stitch length just to make it look nice here. All right, and remove the pins as you go. Okay. Careful to remove the pins. And here you are closing up the binding. All right, and now this is done, and that's how you sew a label into binding. Let's do a quick recap of all of our label sewing. This is a folded label sewn into a horizontal seam. This is a folded label sewn into a side seam. This is a standard flat label sewn around all 4 edges. This is the same standard flat label, just sewn on each side to create a loop. This label has each side folded in, so we stitched down each side. Last but certainly not least, this is a folded label sewn into binding. That about wraps up this episode of the Sewing Report. I hope you found all of this helpful. These Sarah Hart's labels are available in the Sewing Report Etsy shop, along with many of the supplies featured. Leave me a comment down below and check out some of my other videos. I've got plenty of sewing machine tutorials and basic sewing videos here. I'm Jen with the Sewing Report. I'll see you again in the next one. And remember, whatever you're doing, make it fun.